actually sets up the context for our first question really well, because all of you have worked, you're all development sector experts and professionals. You've really worked across a variety of sort of subsectors in the development ecosystem. And today, you're also championing and leading on climate. And climate, you know, it's interesting, the history of working on climate in India. It used to be if you worked on the environment sector, you eventually transitioned into working on climate. Today, if you're working on development, that transition is immediate to climate. So it's really shifted. And I think, as I said, all three of you are really at the forefront of that, you know, sort of transition, that transformative journey that we're seeing. You're leading it in your CSR organizations. And Ashwini, let's start with you. I mean, it's the same question for all three of you, but maybe Ashwini, you can go first, and then you, Foram, and Rumi. But I'd love you to talk to us about how are you seeing this evolution in your own organization, in your CSR, and how are you defining that intersection between climate and development?
Interesting. Shloka, I think you've been more than modest. You're the one who's convening all of us. I said Shloka is being more than modest. I think she's the one who's convening all of us, and that's the reason why we are today talking about all this. I think if you look at it, institutions are not far away, or I would say detached from their ecosystem. If you look at the larger MDGs and their foray into SDGs, I think that itself tells you how the whole world was looking at development. Where first we were looking at it in silos, and then we started realizing that there's a lot of interconnection between them, and then we realized that development is not just the domain of development institutions or bilateral and multilateral institutions, but private sector also has got an important role to play in that. So I think evolution in the thought process of development space has always been there, and I think that's how institutions, whether private or public, have been guided by that. Thankfully for us, since we as a foundation had a history of getting into a lot of things because of the physical footprint that we had across the country, and I would say gratefully we always had our ears to the ground. It helped us, pick up a lot of nuances, a lot of lessons from various places, and the interconnectedness of these things, the comprehensiveness that I was mentioning in the earlier session, started evolving. That and I'll give you a very small little example from one of our projects in Maharashtra, where we actually intervened with a very simplistic thing that we want to increase the incomes of the small. In fact, we actually entered through malnutrition thing, that Palghar is getting all the bad light for malnutrition related deaths. So let's start working on that. When we started working on that, we realized that migration is an issue. The children die because the parents have to migrate. Why do the parents migrate? Because they do not have livelihood opportunities in that plateau. If they don't have livelihood opportunities, why they are not there? Because they can't even do subsistence level agriculture. If they can't do subsistence level agriculture also, why is it so? Because water is not there. So you end up doing water, right? And so therefore, when you talk about climate action or climate change, I think it's an over-encompassing. At the end of the day, whether you are a corporate or whether you're a public sector institution, whether you are a development professional or you are an ESG expert, as I heard some time ago, or you are a thela wala on the street, at the end of the day, we breathe the same air, we are under the same blue sky, which doesn't look blue nowadays. And we are drinking the same water from the same soil. So I think that's the punch. I think that's the thing, that climate as a thing is co-owned by all of us. We all inherit it, and we all are going to pass it on to the next generations. And that's why that becomes a very significant, comprehensive lens to look at everything that we do.
Yeah. I think beautifully said. We all inherit it when we pass it on. So yeah, Ashwini, in fact, the evolution...
Foram, could you speak a little louder? I think they're having difficulty at the back.
Yeah, so the evolution, did happen both ways. A little which goes as a trigger inside out, a little which comes as a trigger outside in. So I am really enjoying this, whether ESG funding is going to have better environmental impact Is that so? And what is the difference between ESG and sustainability? And these are some internal and external dialogues that we have. So an interesting one.
Please tell us when you find the answer also to that. I want to know, first off.
One nugget I have found as a joke you could take or whatever is that ESG, it's your double materiality concept, right? So ESG is what the world does to you as a company. And sustainability is what you do as well to the world, and I'm oversimplifying it. But the beauty of this whole dialogue is to say that there are various levels of awareness which corporates have gone through, and our own value chains teach us things, our own feet on the ground, and given the way Tata Power Trust or the larger Tata Group ecosystems are, we kind of learn from experiences. And that is where, the terminologies become more and more hybrid. So I think finally we are just going through language evolution in this whole space more than any changed action evolution, So the actions are very similar. I mean, the programs that we do, climate action program or the climate funding. Now, why is it only climate funding is one of the first things that philanthropists or trustees in several boards that we sit ask. It's not just climate funding, right? It is a kind of program, like you said, rightly, the co-benefits. But now co-benefits kinds of subsume everything else inside it. So how do we kind of name our programs right is one thing that we've gone through as our journey. And I'll give an example of one of the programs we are speaking about is, say for example, the Great Indian Bustard Conservation Program. Now, is that a climate program? Is that a people awareness program? Is that a community ecosystem program? And can Tata Power Trust or Tata alone make a mammoth change or impact? So that brings me to my next point of big learning, that no one corporation is enough to drive sustained long-term climate action of a complex nature. And while the trigger may be your local trigger of, say for example, Rajasthan में किसी ने कुछ बोल दिया इसलिए हमें कुछ करना है, या हम believe करते हैं और हमारा एक legacy है इसलिए हमें कुछ करना है, और वो सारा मिला के हमें कुछ करना है, फिर भी हम अकेले नहीं कर सकते. And this is one very big, large learning, and comes from a lot of pain, triumphs and challenges. And this is something where I think a collaborative platform, which is an action platform, versus a waiting for one corporate to take a lead. And what is the motivation for that one corporation to build a network versus trying to own the whole thing? So who creates those motivations is the ecosystems approach. And I'll now go away from climate and talk about what we do in the, say for example, a disability or a neurodiversity ecosystem space. Again, can we do it alone? No, we need the Women and Child Welfare Department. We need the ICDS, because that's where this thing is. You need the Ministry of Child Welfare, and you need several corporations and others to action. Same gets applied there. But the motivation to create ecosystems and who does it rest on is another big learning. And that's why I will pick up to share more thoughts on as we go along. So
no, I think brilliantly articulated by both Ashwini and you. What I've gathered thus far is, Ashwini, you're encouraging an overarching, all-encompassing approach. Climate, cuts across sectors and activities and definitions. Foram, you've mentioned the need for a collaborative approach. I think all three of you are collaborative leaders, and I think that's something that can't be stressed enough. Climate is a systemic issue. It cannot be sort of dealt with by one single intervention, by one single corporate alone. So I think, absolutely sort of fantastic learnings already. Rumi, coming to you, the previous panel was talking about greenwashing. I actually think there's another term which is more relevant, which is green wishing, where corporates, CSRs, they genuinely believe they're doing more on climate than they may be, or more on sustainability than they may be. And that is actually a bigger concern today than the PR mechanism. And I don't think green wishing is, insidious in the sense that it's good intent. But there are challenges to working on climate solutions. So as you tell us a little bit more about your organization, how you're approaching that intersection of climate and development, can you also address why is it so difficult to work on climate solution? What are some of the challenges CSR faces?
Thank you very much, Shloka, and thanks to the CSR Box team for getting us all together for such exciting sessions. Shloka just threw a googly at me with the last question, so I'm going to come to that later. But let me start with first explaining who we are. I'm quite sure you've heard of EY, but just difference between what we have in the panel. So what is, of course, known to everyone is that climate science today tells that whether you're a big organization or a small organization, you have to look at, it's critical for all of us to look at ways to reduce carbon and carbon in the atmosphere. So that goes without saying. And as a service firm, we are, of course, extremely excited to be a part of this journey, and I'll tell you why. Now, we have a carbon goal, we have a net zero goal, and we became carbon neutral in 2020. So that was one of our biggest milestone when we started in the carbon journey. And now we are into the net zero journey, which we hope to achieve by FY25. Now, we are a services business. We are a little less complicated than the other businesses that you're talking about, where many of your carbon footprint is very difficult to abate. And no matter what inputs you put in, it's a very long and complicated journey. For us, it's slightly simpler in that way, because our carbon footprint is reasonably lower. We started mapping our carbon and energy footprint much earlier. We did that because it's a part of our business to do so. So we use our skill set, our talent, our services for our client and the larger ecosystem, helping them to reduce their carbon footprint and get them to a more, what we call as a low carbon future. So because of the way that we are designed, we started that journey much earlier. We made our commitments globally. And as an organization, which is 160 plus member firms across the world, we were able to progress to a reasonable extent in this journey. Now, where it gets complicated, in the sense that even when you are in a journey like this, the solutions that you're looking for, the technology that you're expecting to be developed to get you to that net zero journey is not here as yet, right? It's still in a pretty much development phase. And that's where you're looking at, I wouldn't call it interim solutions, but we all had to get to a how do you buy carbon credits scenario, because that was necessary in the journey. So I'll talk more about that later, but we had to go for global programs that look at wind energy generation in China, or renewable energy, solar generation in India, or biomass land projects, and so on, all of those examples that you saw before. Now, coming to the point that you said, if I understood that question correctly, it still seems to be like a googly question, but when I'm there. So I think it's an evolving journey. A part of it is where you are required to ensure you are compliant. So your ESG journey is a compliant journey. Then it's a spectrum of work. So from ESG to what you do beyond your ESG compliance for the community, because the fact of the matter is, even in India, we are talking 80% of the conversation is renewable energy transitions, right? And 85% plus of investments of the expected $200 billion investment that we are talking about is going to be renewable energy. But carbon reduction and carbon mitigation is as important than our transition to renewable energy. Now, that's not talked about, and I think that's where the gap is. So how do you bring in those adaptation, mitigation, fantastic examples by this team previously? How do you bring it in the conversation? How do you build a portfolio that includes your compliance? It also includes the actions that you take to continue to a low carbon future, low carbon actions in the environment? And then what do you invest in to build a more sustainable future, which is where innovative solutions come into play, which has a very large deployment journey. So that's where you require patient capital, patient partners to make sure that those solutions come into play in your lifetime. I hope I answered your question, Shloka.
You did, and I think you threw another googly out there, which I'm going to turn to Ashwini and Foram to respond to. But I think you bring up a really interesting point, Rumi. Is the nature of climate, the solutions that we're putting out there, is it inherently impossible for CSR to fund? Long-term, patient capital, cannot sort of focus on short-term targets. Are those the challenges you would both think are perhaps the biggest when it comes to funding climate solutions, or are there others we haven't even counted for?
So, Shloka, what do you define as climate solutions also needs to be understood.
Here.
Missed that.
I said, what do you call as climate solutions also needs to be defined.
Perfect.
So, innocuously, without knowing it, a lot of things are actually being done, which are climate solutions if you look at it from that lens. The only thing is, how do you define it? If you're working on agriculture, but you're looking at, so-called climate smart agriculture, it's a climate solution. If you're doing solid waste management, it's a climate solution.
Correct.
Right? If you're doing water conservation, it's a climate solution. So first of all, I think again, today I think from morning my word is comprehensiveness. So if you can, comprehend in a comprehensive manner the amount of things that we are all doing, and if you all bundle them together, they are all climate solutions. So I think that lens is very important, that no matter what you do, whichever side you touch the problem from, it's actually a climate solution. And if you define that in that manner, then you would have the confidence also, and you would have the willingness also to support that. I think that's one part. Second, I think the second part of your question, I think if only somebody can do that, it is only CSR fund that can do that. Because we would have that appetite to fail and be courageous enough to admit it. Risk taking is not going to be possible in business processes. A whole lot of fund, and that too of very large amounts, is actually involved. So you cannot go wrong in a business process. But in CSR, you can certainly have that courage to experiment, pilot, fail, again learn from that, and then do something. So I think if we have to, and if you look around, from our own experience of Earthcare Awards, the kind of organizations, you've been a part of the jury there, the kind of solutions that have come from grassroots level institutions across the entire country, and for that matter, whole of South Asia, the kind of work that these organizations are doing, the kind of innovations that they've taken up, that gives you a very clear sign that yes, it is possible, and it can certainly be done. Only thing is, how do you put that framework together? Climate solution is not a very high-tech, high-technology kind of a solution sitting in some big glass building which requires billions of dollars to be invested upon. I think these are small little solutions which, when put together, they would add up into each other, and that's where the whole solution would come from.
This is music to my ears. So this is why we wanted these three people on this panel, because not only is it evident from your answer that climate is just a matter of how you define it and how you build in that lens. It's also capital that is should be the least risk averse, right? Like the fact that CSR has this tremendous potential. Foram, do you agree? I can see you nodding, so I know you do.
So I agree with everything that Ashwini said, and I'm going to really build on that, because this bundling of small grassroots solutions, and who is this agency which brings it together? So when you say funding, it typically goes to a boardroom. So if we kind of unpack the whole situation, somebody puts a proposal up, somebody reviews it, and somebody approves it. And coming down to the basics of it, right? Now, that somebody typically is one NGO or one project which puts that proposal up. Or is it that large network? Or is it that an India Climate Collaborative, for example, has a large
Thank you for the plug.
has a large program which is talking about multi-geography action projects. And I remember this as a very beautiful experience. Anything that you convert into action projects of small, diverse kinds and move from a mammoth-ness to micro-basing it, I think works beautiful. But then, is it that one organization which will be required to fund it? One big fear that I'm noticing across boards is this going to become only my funda and for how long? Right? So once we commit to that kind of action which does not give you immediate results, do the companies, and especially the ones with deep roots and a trust-based ecosystem like you were speaking earlier, will not be able to move out, and it will be then responsible to either do it alone or bring in a larger network alone. So it really helps right from the scratch, having an ecosystem proposal in place right from the beginning. And that is one big learning from the boards, that if you spend enough time co-creating the projects with willing players and then take them to not one board, but more than one board, those are the kind of collaborative programs which have the patient capital that you have been speaking about. I think what Ruma is speaking is patient capital, not from one source, but from multiple sources. And I think one of the TATA Power ways, and one thing we learned through the Smart Grid program that we have worked with, is this dichotomy between incubation action and community action. Why should there be that divide? Because why is there a feeling or thinking that NGOs cannot work with startups and startups cannot work with grassroots, and all of them cannot work in a bundle?
Touched upon a very important aspect, in fact, because in our own strategy discussions at the foundation, one big disconnect that we found was that, it's high time that you break these barriers.
And kind of, yeah.
And I think this is where, we got into skill impact bond and all those kind of products, where we realized that NGOs have got great understanding at the grassroots level, but perhaps they are too thinly resourced for looking at innovations and transformational innovations in that sense. On the other hand, you have a whole startup ecosystem which is thriving and is ready to, go into action, but it lacks the resources and doesn't have that ground level presence. So if this disconnect between the two key players is bridged, and they are connected with the communities, because at the end of the day, it may sound very politically correct, but the fact is that whatever you and I want to do, if the community's acceptance is not there, and if their ownership is not there, it is not going to sustain. From our own experiences, this is what we've learned. So I think this ecosystem nurturing would require, and I think it's important for us to also, realize that from a risk mitigation point of view also, the important aspect of collaboration that you're touching upon is something very important. We all, use this barometer, how much resources are being provided by the government for a program. What is that? It's not about extra pot of money coming. It's about somebody else co-owning the whole
More
concept.
shoulders owning it.
Yes.
Exactly. No, I think that was very well said. And I think, what I really appreciate about this conversation is that all of you have very quickly moved past challenges into what needs to be done, what the ecosystem can do to sort of meet those inherent challenges, and why we need to. So I see that change also in the climate conversation. I think 5 years ago, it was very much, problem-based mindset. And today, it's really problem-solving. Rumi, anything you'd add to sort of how the ecosystem needs to develop or evolve? We at the ICC are building a climate solutions platform today for CSR to highlight those best-in-class projects. But that's one initiative, of course. How do you think the ecosystem needs to move forward?
Thank you, Shloka. So let me first just say that what a panelist has said is all agreed. That is exactly the way that we need to go. But I'll take a step back and say, look, there are companies that has been early in that journey, and there are companies that are new there. We all know that. And that's very evident when you look at the CSR spends data every year. Bain Company comes out with a report. Many organizations comes out with the report to say, where is the money being spent? So the percentage of spend in environment is very poor, which also gives an indication that the number of organizations associated with environment, sustainability, linked causes are less in number. So the challenge starts there actually in terms of like we were talking in the beginning, the definition of what is sustainability and environment action, what links to ESG, which means what you're talking about is, often we get proposals from organizations that says, look, plant trees and you will save carbon. Now that narrative doesn't work for us because we know 1 equal to is not, 1 and 1 is not 2. So there is a need for, sort of logical narrative building. And when you are looking at a proposition, and I resonate with what the conversation was, when you have a collaborative, effort, or you have an organization with the necessary backup of research comes to you with a proposition and says, look, if you invest here, this is the kind of returns that's going to happen. And I don't mean returns in capital, returns in terms of social returns, environmental returns in the next 5 years' time to your farmers, to your beneficiaries, and so on. When you come with the right narrative and the logical thinking, then the project is CSR investable. That is the one thing that is lacking at this stage, I think. It's a very one-off. The second is, as we all, and let's all agree, to some extent that, like Shloka, you started with it, who's an environment expert? Who are the decision makers in CSR or sustainability? Like I heard the previous panel talk of something very interesting. And I think we all had our laughs over it, over our careers, thinking, here's my ESG vertical, and here's my maybe a sustainability vertical, and here's my CSR vertical. The CSR folks are very happy because they got all the money. And the compliance folks, which is the ESG folks, are unhappy because they're always getting pulled up into what's your next action. They're not talking to each other. I am very proud to say that in our case, we have a single vertical that manages net zero goals and your CSR goals. But that said, what it comes down to is, the sort of a end-to-end understanding of what it means to take positive actions that can reduce your carbon emissions, adoption, mitigation, and so on and so forth. Now that kind of understanding is lacking, and we all have to probably work very hard to get there, to be able to get a sense of things on why you invest in a climate project. Even something like a smart agriculture, where does it add up? Where does it flow in? Where does it contribute? What is the larger picture? I think these are important areas that often decision makers struggle with when they are talking about investing their small resources as compared to many others. So, in that scenario, you have to pick your battles, right? So you say, okay, you go here, and this is a war that I'll get to in the next 2 years' time. I think those are some of those factors. I can go on and on about challenges, but I think the point is that there is a growing consciousness that you have to do a low carbon footprint to your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and so on. But you also have to go beyond it. It's not you have tick marked your low carbon journey, and then you don't do anything else in the community. I think that consciousness that you have to balance the two, and it's not about spending your CSR funds. It's about how you invest, where you invest, what does it get you in the next 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years time. I think that's the in a conversation.
I think brilliantly put. I think, you spelled out intent as well in your answer, which I think is a really important facet that we don't address often enough. Look, our dream as the ICC would be we'd love to have an Indian CSR table at COP28 next year. I think that should be an ambition that we should be moving towards because there's tremendous leadership here. We've already witnessed it, on this panel and the previous panel, and I think that's an ambition that India can lead on for the Global South. I really think corporate philanthropy should take that stage, and that's the runway for sort of the next year for sure. I know we're running out of time. Am I allowed to ask the audience for a question or two? We don't have any time? Okay, I think we're on a tight schedule, but I would really recommend or suggest that, you approach our panel after this. The ICC also has a stall number 65, and we're here all day, so please do come talk to us. We'd love to hear more from you. And again, thank you to our audience. Thank you to CSR Box. Ashwini, once closing word, you have the mic.
One closing request. Shloka, talked about ICC. Good, I started with a bang. No, I have not ended. So I think, one takeaway that I wanted to leave behind for people to consider, and we'll be happy to, discuss, like what you said, collaboration is the key. With ICC, as one of the founding, I would say contributors to ICC's platform, we are very, very excited to have this climate solutions marketplace to create a connect between which are the technology providers who are having the knowledge product with them, a whole range of institutions who are attached to the ground. They need those solutions and they are the ones who can actually implement them. And then people like us who may be having a little understanding of this and a little understanding of that, but would certainly be having resources to put in and maybe some thoughts also. So my request to all of you is please reach out to this lady and let's see how we can, come together as an important force to, focus on these climate solutions, because that's going to be very significant for this country.